I'm Calla Santiago, 19 years old. Until 8 months ago, I believed that success meant leaving everything you know behind. Then my father's stroke changed everything. I gave up my full scholarship to NYU to help save our family bakery. And everyone said I was wasting my life. My guidance counselor's words still echo in my mind. You're throwing away your only chance to escape. What they didn't know was that I'd been carrying the weight of our family struggles for years. Watching my parents sacrifice everything to keep our Queen's bakery alive. What I discovered in those months of flour-dusted aprons and sleepless nights surprised even me. But here's what makes this story unbelievable. The very thing everyone said would ruin. My future became the key to finding who I really was. How could something that looked like giving up actually be the moment I finally grew up? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you. Make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Santiago family bakery sits on the corner of 82nd Street and Roosevelt Avenue like a stubborn flower pushing through concrete. 3 generations of my family have kneaded dough within these walls, and the building itself seems to remember every loaf, every celebration cake, every morning rush of customers grabbing coffee and pastels before catching the 7 train. The brick facade is painted a cheerful yellow that my grandmother chose in 1987, though it's faded now to something more like butter left too long in sunlight. Above the storefront, our apartment stretches across the 2nd floor, close enough to the street that we can hear conversations in Spanish and English, mixing together like ingredients in one of Mama's recipes. I grew up thinking the bakery was too small for my dreams. Every morning, the smell of fresh bread would wake me at 5 a.m., drifting up through the floorboards that connected our bedroom to the ovens below. I used to press my pillow over my head, trying to muffle the sounds of my parents beginning there. Day in the pre-dawn darkness, the gentle thud of dough being shaped, the whistle of the espresso machine, the soft murmur of their voices planning the day's specials. Even as a child, I knew this routine by heart, could predict exactly when the first customers would arrive, and which regulars would order their usual without even asking, but I wanted more than routine. I wanted surprise, adventure, the kind of life that didn't smell permanently of vanilla and cinnamon. I wanted to write stories about places I'd never been, interview people whose names would appear in newspapers, sit in coffee shops in Manhattan where nobody knew that my family had. Been making the same tres leches cake recipe since before I was born. Don't misunderstand me, I loved our bakery. Loved the way Mrs. Chun's face lit up when she saw we had saved her a guava pastry. Loved how couples would hold hands over our small round tables while sharing flan. But love and dreams don't always point in the same direction. My father, Carlos, understood this better than anyone. He'd arrive in the kitchen each morning with flour already dusting his worn apron, his thick hands gentle despite their size as he shaped dinner rolls and braided. Chala. Dad had the kind of face that made people want to tell him their problems, soft brown eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, a mustache that twitched when he was thinking, smile lines that deepened whenever someone complimented the bread. He'd immigrated from Colombia with my mother when they were both 23, carrying nothing but hope and my grandmother's recipe book written in faded ink on index cards. Nia, he would say when he caught me reading novels behind the counter instead of helping customers. There's a whole world out there waiting for your words. This bakery, it's our foundation. But you're meant to build something higher. My mother, Lusa, saw things differently. She had practical hands and a practical heart, both shaped by years of early mornings and tight budgets. Where my father was gentle and philosophical, Mama was efficient and protective. She could frost a wedding cake while calculating inventory and planning next week's menu. Her dark hair always pulled back in a neat bun, her movements precise and purposeful. She loved me fiercely, but her love came wrapped in worry. Dreams don't pay rent, she would remind me whenever I talked about college, though her eyes would soften even as she said it. And dreams don't take care of family when times get hard. This fundamental difference between my parents created a tension that hummed through our household like the refrigeration units in the bakery coolers. Dad encouraged my writing, even. framing the first article I published in our high school newspaper and hanging it next to the health department certificate. Mama worried that too much dreaming would leave me unprepared for real life, the kind that required calloused hands and practical skills. My younger brother Mateo navigated this tension by avoiding it entirely. At 15, he had perfected the art of being present but not engaged, helpful but not invested. He'd work the register after school with the enthusiasm of someone fulfilling a prison sentence, his lanky frame folded over his phone whenever possible. Mateo had inherited Dad's thoughtful eyes, but Mama's stubborn streak, and he wore his boredom like armor against our family's expectations. Why can't you just hire someone? He'd ask whenever Mama assigned him weekend shifts, his voice carrying that particular teenage exasperation that makes simple questions sound like accusations. "Because this is our family business," Mama would reply, her tone suggesting this was the most obvious thing in the world. "Because we take care of each other." But Mateo didn't want to take care of anyone except himself, which I understood even if it frustrated me. He was 2 years younger but felt ancient in his cynicism, already convinced that adult life was a series of compromises wrapped in false cheerfulness. I worried about him, about the way he seemed to be disappearing into himself, even as his body stretched taller each month. The bakery itself was a character in our family story, with moods and needs as specific as any person. In summer, the ovens made the kitchen unbearable by noon, and we prop open the back door and aim fans at whoever was unlucky enough to be working the afternoon shift. In winter, the warmth from the baking bread made our storefront a haven for delivery drivers and construction workers who'd linger over their coffee, reluctant to return to the cold. The equipment was old but reliable, like a car that knows exactly how to get you home, even when the engine sounds questionable. Our customers were neighbors in the truest sense, people who knew our names, who asked about my college applications, who brought their visiting relatives to try papas and panadas. There was Mr. Rodriguez, who ordered the same sesame seed bagel every morning at exactly 7:15, and Mrs. Patterson, who bought a dozen chocolate chip cookies every Friday for her book club. Young mothers would bring their toddlers for weekend pastries, letting the kids press their faces against the display case while deciding between frosted sugar cookies and mini cupcakes. These relationships felt precious and limiting at the same time. I loved being part of a community, loved the way our bakery served as a gathering place for celebrations and comfort alike. But I also felt the weight of their expectations, the way people would say things like, "Calla's going to be famous someday," with such certainty that it felt more like pressure than encouragement. What if I didn't want to be famous? What if I just wanted to write stories that mattered, even if only a few people read them? My acceptance to NYU felt like vindication and escape rolled into one miraculous envelope. The scholarship covered everything: tuition, room, board, even a small stipend for books and supplies. When the letter arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, in March, I read it 3 times before the words really sank in. Then I ran downstairs to the bakery, letter clutched in my flour-dusted hands, shouting the news to anyone who would listen. Dad cried. Actually cried, standing there in his apron with tears streaming down his face, while customers applauded and Mima hugged me so tight I could barely breathe. For a moment, all the tension dissolved and we were just a family celebrating something beautiful together. I was going to study journalism and cultural studies, going to live in Washington Square Park shadow, going to become the person I'd always imagined myself to be. The summer before college was supposed to be preparation time. I worked in the bakery during the day, saving money for textbooks and dorm room supplies, and spent my evenings planning my new life. I bought notebooks and highlighters, researched my professors online, found the perfect coffee shop near campus, where I imagined myself studying for midterms. Everything felt possible and inevitable, like I was finally stepping onto the path I was meant to walk. Should have known that nothing in life ever goes according to plan. The boxes were stacked. In our hallway for weeks before move-in day, a physical reminder of my approaching departure. Clothes for every season, books I couldn't bear to leave behind. The desk lamp I'd used for late-night writing sessions throughout high school. Each box represented a piece of the life I was building, the person I was becoming. Dad would pat them affectionately whenever he passed, like they were beloved pets preparing for a journey. My brilliant daughter, he'd say, his voice thick with pride and something else I couldn't quite identify. Looking back, I think it was already the beginning of goodbye. The night before I was supposed to leave, we had planned a family dinner at our favorite restaurant, The Little, Puerto Rican place on Northern Boulevard, where the servers knew our order and the owner always sent out free flan. It was going to be our last meal together before everything changed, before I crossed the bridge into Manhattan and left my childhood permanently behind. But when I came downstairs that morning, my arms full of the last few items to pack, I found Dad sitting at our kitchen table with his head in his hands, not reading the newspaper like usual, not checking the weather forecast or planning the day's bread orders. Just sitting there, perfectly still, like he was listening to something the rest of us couldn't hear. "Papa," I said, setting down my books. "Are you okay?" He looked up at me then, and his smile was different, somehow smaller, more fragile than usual. "Just thinking about how quiet it's going to be around here," he said. "How much we're going to miss you." I kissed the top of his head, breathing in the familiar scent of coffee and aftershave that always clung to him. "I'll visit every weekend. I promised. You won't even notice I'm gone." "Oh, Mia," he said, reaching up to squeeze my hand. "We're going to notice." If I had known those would be among the last coherent words my father would speak for months, I would have stayed in that kitchen forever, holding his hand and memorizing every detail of his face. But life doesn't give you warnings about the moments that will split your world in two. It just lets you live them, ordinary and unremarkable, until suddenly they're not. The morning was supposed to be simple. Load the car, say goodbye to the neighborhood, drive across the bridge into my new life. Instead, it became the day that taught me how quickly everything you think you know can crumble. Dad insisted on carrying the heaviest boxes himself, despite my protests that I could manage them perfectly fine. He had always been that way, protective without being overwhelming, helpful in the quiet manner of someone who shows love through actions rather than grand gestures. We made 3 trips up and down the narrow stairs, him leading the way with my desktop computer, me following with armloads of clothes and textbooks. Each trip felt ceremonial somehow, like we were participating in some ancient ritual of letting go. "You packed enough books to stock a library," he teased, hefting my literature anthology with exaggerated effort. "Planning to read every book ever written in your first semester?" "Only the important ones," I shot back, matching his playful tone. This was our usual banter, comfortable and warm, the kind of conversation that happens when 2 people know each other's rhythms perfectly. Mama watched from the kitchen window, her silhouette framed by the lace curtains she'd hung when they first moved into the apartment 19 years ago. She was pretending to organize something on the counter, but I could tell she was really just finding reasons to stay visible, to be part of this goodbye without having to face it directly. She had always processed big emotions by keeping her hands busy, and I recognized the way she was moving, quick, purposeful gestures that had nothing to do with actual tasks. "Lusa," Dad called up to her, "come help us argue about whether Calla needs to bring her entire winter wardrobe to a dorm room the size of a closet." "She needs everything," Mama called back, her voice carrying that fierce protectiveness that had defined my entire childhood. "Better to have too much than not enough." This was exactly the kind of disagreement they'd been having all summer, Dad gently encouraging me to pack light and embrace the adventure, Mama insisting I prepare for every possible scenario. Neither of them was wrong exactly, but they're different. Approaches revealed the fundamental tension in our family about my leaving. Dad saw it as growth and opportunity. Mama saw it as risk and separation. Mateo was conspicuously absent from the loading process, claiming he had to work the morning shift at the bakery. This was probably true, but it was also convenient avoidance. My little brother had been increasingly distant as departure day approached, responding to my attempts at conversation with shrugs and non-committal sounds. I understood his strategy: if you don't engage with goodbye, maybe it won't really happen. The final box contained my writing. Supplies. Journals filled with story fragments, favorite pens, the typewriter I found at a thrift shop and restored with Dad's help. It wasn't heavy, but it felt significant, like I was literally carrying my dreams across the threshold of my old life into my new one. Dad handled it with extra care, cradling it against his chest like something precious. "This one goes in the front seat," he said. "Can't risk the future Pulitzer Prize winner's tools getting damaged." I rolled my eyes, but I was smiling. "Dad, you know most writers use computers now, right?" "Computers don't have soul," he replied seriously. "That typewriter has personality, character. It's going to help you write better stories." We were arranging everything in the trunk of our ancient Honda when it happened. One moment, Dad was debating the best way to fit my desk lamp between two suitcases, his hands gesturing animatedly as he explained his packing philosophy, and the next moment he was simply ... gone as in disappeared, but gone as in the person I knew as my father had suddenly vacated his body, leaving behind someone I didn't recognize. He stopped talking mid-sentence, his mouth hanging open slightly, his eyes fixed on something I couldn't see. Then his face began to change, the left side slowly drooping like melting wax, his features sliding into an expression of confusion and fear. "Dad?" I said, and my voice sounded very far away, like it was coming from someone else's mouth. "Dad, what's wrong?" He tried to answer me, but the words that came out weren't words at all, just sounds, frustrated attempts at communication that made no sense. His right hand came up to touch his face, as if he could feel the wrongness, but couldn't understand. What was happening to him? I had read about strokes in health class, had seen them portrayed in movies and television shows, but nothing had prepared me for the reality of watching someone I loved disappear in real time. This wasn't dramatic or cinematic. It was terrifying in its ordinariness, the way catastrophe can arrive disguised as just another Tuesday morning. "Mama!" I screamed, and I heard my voice crack with panic. "Mama, something's wrong with Dad." She must have heard the terror in my voice because she appeared in the doorway instantly, still wiping her hands on a dish towel. Her eyes took in the scene, Dad swaying slightly on his feet, me hovering beside him with my hands outstretched like I could catch him if he fell, and her face went completely white. "Carlos," she said, her voice sharp with command. "Carlos, can you hear me?" He turned toward her voice, but his movements were slow and uncoordinated, like someone learning to operate an unfamiliar machine. When he tried to speak again, the sounds were even more garbled, frustrated noises that made my heart feel like it was breaking inside my chest. Mama moved faster than I'd ever seen her move, her practical nature taking over in the face of crisis. She was already dialing 911 as she guided Dad toward the steps, speaking to the emergency operator in rapid-fire English while shooting instructions at me in Spanish. "Get his medication list from the kitchen drawer," she said. "The blue folder?" "And grab his insurance cards from my purse." I ran upstairs on shaking legs, my hands fumbling through drawers I'd opened 1,000 times before. Everything felt surreal and urgent at the same time, like I was moving through thick water while racing against time. The insurance cards were exactly where Mama said they'd be, organized and ready because she was always prepared for emergencies. Even one she'd never imagined up. By the time I got back downstairs, Dad was sitting on our front steps, Mama kneeling beside him and speaking in the low, soothing voice she'd used when I was little and afraid of thunderstorms. He was looking at her with such trust and confusion that I had to turn away for a moment, overwhelmed by the reversal of roles, the way my strong, capable father had suddenly become someone who needed protection. The ambulance arrived with sirens and flashing lights that drew neighbors from their apartments and shops. Mrs. Chan appeared with her hands pressed to her mouth, and Mr. Rodriguez offered to call anyone we needed. The familiar faces of our community gathered on the sidewalk, their expressions reflecting the same shock and concern I felt, but I could barely focus on them. All my attention was fixed on the paramedics as they asked Dad questions he couldn't answer and performed tests that confirmed what we all already knew: something terrible had happened inside his brain. "We need to get him to the hospital immediately," one of the paramedics told Mama, and her composure finally cracked. I watched tears stream down her face as she nodded, agreeing to let strangers take her husband away in an ambulance, trusting that they could fix what had broken. "I'll ride with him," she said, but the paramedic shook his head. "Family can follow in their own vehicle. We need space to work." This seemed impossibly cruel that at the moment when we most needed to be together, we were being separated by protocol and procedure. But Mama just nodded again, her years of immigrant practicality teaching her when to fight and when to comply. "Calla, get the car keys," she said, her voice steady again despite the tears. "We're going to follow them." I looked at our Honda, still packed with all my college belongings, the trunk half open and my future scattered across the back seat. The boxes that had seemed so important an hour ago now looked ridiculous, irrelevant, like artifacts from someone else's life. "What about ... I started to say, gesturing at my things. "Leave it," Mama said firmly. "All of it. None of that matters right now." So I did. I left my carefully packed boxes sitting in the car, my desk lamp precariously balanced on a suitcase, my dreams literally suspended between my old life and the one I'd been about to begin. Instead of driving toward Manhattan in my dorm room, I followed an ambulance to Queens General Hospital, watching the red and white lights flicker in my rearview mirror like a warning. I was already too late to heed. The emergency room was everything I'd expected and nothing I was prepared for. Bright fluorescent lights that made everyone look sick, the smell of disinfectant mixed with fear, the sound of monitors beeping and people crying and medical professionals speaking in the calm, urgent tones of people who deal with crisis every day. We were directed to a waiting area with plastic chairs and outdated magazines, told that someone would update us as soon as there was information to share. Mama sat perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes fixed on the doors that led to wherever they had taken Dad. I had never seen her so quiet, so utterly focused on something beyond her control. For as long as I could remember, she'd been the one with answers, the one who solved problems and managed emergencies. But this was bigger than anything her practical skills could fix. "He was fine this morning," I said, needing to fill the silence with something, anything. "He was laughing about my books, helping load the car. How does someone just change like that?" Mama didn't answer immediately. When she finally spoke, her voice was very quiet. "Sometimes the body just ... breaks," she said. "Sometimes there's no warning, no time to prepare. It just happens." I thought about all the conversations we'd had about my future, all the plans we'd made, all the assumptions about how life would unfold. College, career, maybe graduate school, eventually marriage and children and a life built on the foundation of choices and opportunities. None of those conversations had included this possibility that everything could change in the space between loading one box and loading the next. Doctor appeared after what felt like hours but was probably only 45 minutes. She was young, probably not much older than me, with kind eyes and tired shoulders that suggested she'd delivered difficult news before. "Mrs. Santiago?" she said, and Mama stood up so quickly she nearly knocked over her chair. "How is he?" Mama asked, and I could hear her accent thickening with stress the way it always did when she was emotional. "Your husband has had what we call an ischemic stroke," the doctor explained, using the careful, measured tone of someone who has learned to deliver terrible news gently. "A blood clot blocked one of the arteries in his brain, cutting off oxygen to that area. We've given him medication to help dissolve the clot, but there has been some damage." The words hung in the air between us like a physical presence. Damage. Such a small word to contain such enormous implications. "What kind of damage?" I heard myself ask, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "The affected area controls speech and motor function on the left side of his body," the doctor continued. "He's stable, and we're hopeful that with therapy and time, he can recover some of what he's lost. But it's going to be a long process, and we need to be realistic about expectations." Realistic about expectations. Another phrase that seemed too small for what it was being asked to carry. What were realistic expectations when your father's words disappeared in the middle of a sentence? What was realistic when your world split? Cleanly in two before the stroke and after? Can we see him? Mama asked, and the doctor nodded. He's resting now, but yes. Just remember that he may seem different, confused. This is normal after what he's been through. Different. Confused. Normal. I was learning a new vocabulary, one I'd never wanted to study. We followed the doctor through corridors that all looked identical, past rooms filled with people fighting, their own battles against failing bodies and uncertain futures. When we reached Dad's room, Mama stopped in the doorway, her hand pressed against the frame like she needed support to remain standing. He looked so small in the hospital bed, surrounded by machines and monitors that beeped and hummed with mechanical precision. His face was slack on the left side, his left arm resting motionless on top of the white blanket. But his eyes were open, and when he saw us, they filled with tears. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Papa, I whispered, moving to his bedside. His right hand reached for mine, squeezing with desperate strength. Mia, he managed to say, though the word was slurred and difficult to understand. It was the first clear thing he'd said since the stroke, and hearing it made me realize how afraid I'd been that he was gone completely. We're here, I told him, holding his hand tightly. We're not going anywhere. As I said those words, I felt something fundamental shift inside me. The boxes in our car, my dorm room assignment, my carefully planned future, all of it suddenly seemed like it belonged to someone else. Some other Calla who had lived in a world where fathers didn't have strokes on college move-in day. This Calla, the one standing in a hospital room holding her father's hand, had different priorities. This Calla wasn't going anywhere. The first morning I woke up in my old bedroom instead of an NYU dorm. I stared at the ceiling for 20 minutes trying to remember why everything felt wrong. Then it all came rushing back: the stroke, the hospital, the phone call to the university explaining that I needed to defer my enrollment indefinitely. The word indefinitely had felt like swallowing glass when I said it to the admissions counselor, but what else could I do? We didn't know how long Dad's recovery would take or even what recovery would look like. Downstairs, the bakery was supposed to open in an hour, but Mama was sitting at our kitchen table surrounded by bills and order forms, looking overwhelmed in a way I'd never seen before. She'd always been the organized one, the one who kept our family's financial life running smoothly while Dad focused on the actual baking. But now she was trying to do both jobs while also managing Dad's medical appointments and insurance paperwork. I don't understand how he kept track of all this, she said without looking up when I entered the kitchen. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and there were dark circles under her eyes that suggested she hadn't slept much. The vendor orders, the payroll, the inventory. I thought I knew how the business worked, but I only knew my part. I poured myself coffee and sat down across from her, looking at the chaos of papers covering our table. What can I do to help? She laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. You can go to college like you're supposed to. This isn't your problem to solve. Mama, I said gently, I'm not going to college. Not right now. We talked about this at the hospital. We talked about you taking a semester off, maybe two, not giving up your entire future. I'm not giving up anything. I'm just postponing it. The look she gave me was full of maternal skepticism and fear. Things that get postponed have a way of becoming permanent, she said, especially for women and families like ours. I knew she was thinking about her own dreams, the ones she'd set aside when she immigrated and again when she got pregnant with me. Mama had wanted to be a teacher in Colombia, had studied education and worked in a primary school before she and Dad decided to chase opportunities in America. But opportunities had turned out to be working double shifts at other people's businesses until they could scrape together enough money to start their own. By the time the bakery was established, she was 35 with 2 children and no time for dreams that didn't involve keeping food on our table. This is different, I insisted, though I wasn't entirely sure that was true. This is temporary. That's what I told myself too, she said quietly, then seemed to catch herself. But that's not your burden to carry. We'll figure something out. Maybe hire someone part-time or ask your Uncle Miguel to help with the books. Uncle Miguel lived in the Bronx and had his own restaurant to worry about. We both knew he couldn't take on the daily management of our bakery, even if he wanted to. And hiring someone part-time would mean money we didn't have, especially with Dad's medical bills starting to arrive. Or, I said, trying to keep my voice casual, you could teach me how to do the books, and I could help with the day-to-day operations while Dad recovers. Mama's shoulders sagged with relief and defeat all. At once. Calla, no. I won't let you sacrifice your education for this business. I'm not sacrificing anything, I said, though we both knew that wasn't entirely true. I'm choosing family. Isn't that what you've always taught me? That family comes first. She was quiet for a long moment, staring down at the vendor invoices spread in front of her. When she finally looked up, her eyes were bright with unshed tears. I taught you that family comes first, she said, but I also wanted you to have choices I never had. I wanted you to have the chance to build something bigger than this little bakery. Maybe I still can, I said, though I wasn't sure what that would look like anymore. Maybe there are different ways to build something meaningful. That first week of running the bakery was like learning to speak a foreign language under pressure. Dad had always made it look effortless, greeting customers by name, remembering who liked extra foam on their cappuccino, knowing exactly when to start the next batch of bread so it would be ready when the lunch crowd arrived. But what looked effortless was actually the result of years of experience and careful attention to detail. I burned 3 batches of cookies, forgot to order enough sandwich rolls for the weekend rush, and accidentally charged Mrs. Patterson $12 for a single cupcake because I couldn't figure out the register system. Each mistake felt catastrophic, like proof that I was failing everyone who was counting on me. It's going to take time, Mama reminded me after I spent an entire afternoon trying to untangle a vendor invoice that made no sense. Your father didn't learn all this overnight either. But time felt like a luxury we couldn't afford. Every day the bakery wasn't running smoothly was money we weren't making, customers we might lose, stress we were adding to an already impossible situation. And every night, I would visit Dad in the rehabilitation facility where he was relearning how to speak and use his left hand. Watching him struggle with tasks that used to be automatic, the rehab center was a cheerful place, trying very hard to disguise its essential sadness. The walls were painted in optimistic colors, sunny yellow and sky blue, and the staff maintained relentlessly positive attitudes even when dealing with patients who were frustrated and frightened. Dad's speech therapist was a young woman named Jennifer, who spoke to him like he was an intelligent adult trapped in a malfunctioning body, which I appreciated even when it was painful to watch. Carlos, I want you to try saying bread for me, she would say during our visits, holding up a picture card. Take your time. Think about how your tongue moves in your mouth. B-U-H.br. Dad would struggle, his face contorting with effort. Sometimes he could get close to the word. Sometimes only the first sound would come out. Either way, it was heartbreaking to watch someone who had spent his life talking to customers, telling stories, sharing his thoughts and feelings, reduced to fighting for every syllable, but there were small victories too. The day he successfully said, Calla, clearly for the first time since the stroke, I cried right there in the therapy room. Jennifer pretended not to notice, but I saw her smile. As she made notes in his chart, recovery isn't linear, she explained to me after one particularly difficult session. Some days will be better than others. The important thing is that he keeps working, keeps trying. The brain has remarkable ability to heal itself, but it takes time and patience. Time and patience. 2 more things that felt impossibly expensive, it was during my second week of managing the bakery that I first really noticed Liam Ortega. He'd been coming in for months, maybe longer, but I'd never paid much attention to him before. He was just another regular customer, someone who ordered the same thing, large coffee, 2 sugars, one of Dad's ham and cheese croissants, and usually ate standing at the counter while scrolling through his phone. But now that I was working the morning shift, I found myself looking forward to his daily visits. He was probably my age, maybe a year or 2 older, with warm brown eyes and the kind of smile that started slowly and then took over his entire face. His hands were always slightly stained with various substances, flour, sauce, sometimes paint, and he wore the uniform of someone who worked in kitchens, non-slip shoes, dark pants, a t-shirt that had seen better days. "You're Carlos's daughter," he said one morning, not really a question. I heard about his stroke. How is he doing? "Getting better, slowly," I said, surprised by how good it felt to talk to someone my own age about something other than vendor orders and insurance claims. "Thank you for asking. Your dad makes the best croissants in Queens," Liam said. "I work at Russo's down the street, and our pastry chef is good, but these ... He held up his breakfast appreciatively. "These are perfect." I felt a flush of pride. That caught me off guard. He's been perfecting that recipe for 20 years. It shows. I keep trying to figure out his secret, but I think it's just time and experience. "You bake?" I asked, genuinely curious. "I try to," he said with a self-deprecating laugh. "I'm a line cook at Russo's, but I want to open my own place eventually. Something small, maybe a food truck. Your dad's always been an inspiration. The way he connects with his customers, remembers everyone's preferences. That's what real hospitality looks like." It was the longest conversation I'd had with someone my age since Dad's stroke, and it felt like drinking cold water after being thirsty. For days, for 20 minutes while we talked about food and dreams and the particular challenge of perfecting yeasted dough, I felt like myself again, not just Carlos's daughter or Lucia's helper, but Calla with her own thoughts and interests. "I should let you get back to work," Liam said eventually, glancing around at the other customers who were starting to line up. "But maybe we could talk more sometime. I'd love to hear more about your dad's techniques." "I'd like that," I said, and meant it more than I expected to. After he left, I found myself moving through the rest of my morning tasks with more energy than I'd felt in weeks. It wasn't until Mama came down to help with the lunch rush that I realized I'd been humming while I worked. "You seem happy today," she observed, restocking the pastry display case. "Did something good happen?" "Just a nice conversation," I said, trying to keep my voice casual, "with one of our regular customers." Mama raised an eyebrow but didn't press for details, which I appreciated. My feelings about Liam were too new and tentative to examine closely, especially when everything else in my life felt so uncertain. That afternoon, while Dad napped between therapy sessions, I sat in his hospital room and tried to do homework. From the online courses I'd enrolled and a compromise that let me maintain some academic progress while staying home. But I kept finding myself distracted, staring out the window at the parking lot and thinking about Liam's hands, the way he talked about opening his own restaurant with such quiet determination. I was 19 years old, and most of my friends were starting their sophomore year of college, joining clubs and dating and staying up too late studying for exams they forget about a month later. Instead, I was learning to calculate profit margins and manage employee schedules, watching my father relearn how to swallow without choking, holding my family together with determination and hope, and very little idea what I was actually doing. Some days, the weight of responsibility felt crushing. But other days when Dad successfully completed a physical therapy exercise, or when a customer complimented the banana bread I'd made from memory, or when a young man with kind eyes lingered over his coffee just to talk to me about dreams. And food those days felt like small miracles. Maybe this wasn't the life I planned, but it was becoming the life I was living. And for the first time since the stroke, that didn't feel like entirely bad news. 3 months into my new life, as a baker/caregiver/business manager, I had developed a routine that would have horrified my former self. Up at 5 a.m. to start the first batch of bread, work the morning rush until Mama arrived at 8, spend the afternoon either doing bookkeeping or visiting Dad at the rehab center, then collapse into bed by 10 p.m. with flour under my fingernails, and aching feet. It wasn't the routine I'd imagined for myself at 19, but there was something oddly satisfying about its predictability. Each day had clear objectives and measurable outcomes. Either the bread rose properly or it didn't. Either we had enough change in the register or we didn't. Either Dad could say 5 new words in speech therapy or he couldn't. There was a simplicity to it that my college-bound self would have found suffocating, but that my current self found almost comforting. The bakery was beginning to feel like mine in ways I hadn't expected. I knew which customers wanted their coffee extra hot and which ones preferred the pastries from the morning batch versus the afternoon one. I could predict the weekend rush down to the hour and had learned to read the neighborhood's rhythms like weather patterns. When construction started on Roosevelt Avenue, I adjusted our lunch specials to appeal to the workers who would stop by for quick filling meals. When the high school had early dismissal, I made sure we had plenty of cookies and hot chocolate, ready for the influx of teenagers. But the more comfortable I became with running the bakery, the more tense things became with Mama. She watched me with a mixture of pride and worry that I found increasingly exhausting. "You're getting too good at this," she said one afternoon, as I calculated the weekly inventory with the efficiency that had taken her years to develop. "Is that a bad thing?" I asked, not looking up from the order sheets. "It is if it means you're not thinking about college anymore." "I think about college all the time," I said, which was true. I thought about my friends posting pictures from their dorm rooms, about the classes I should have been taking, about the professors whose names I'd researched and the clubs I planned to join. But thinking about something and actively missing it weren't the same thing. And lately, I found myself thinking about college the way you might think about a movie you'd enjoyed fondly, but without any urgent desire to experience it again. "Calla," Mama said, sitting down across from me with that particular expression that meant we were about to have a serious conversation. "I need you to promise me something." "What?" "Promise me you'll apply to start school in the spring. Even if it's community college, even if it's just part-time. Promise me you won't let this become permanent." The word permanent hung between us like an accusation. Was that what was happening? Was I allowing a temporary sacrifice to become a permanent lifestyle? And if I was that necessarily a bad thing? The spring semester starts in January. I said carefully, "Dad probably won't be ready to come back to work by then. We'll hire someone, we'll figure it out." "With what money?" "His medical bills are eating up our savings, and business is down because people are still getting used to the changes." This was true, but not entirely fair. Business was down slightly, mostly because I was still learning to replicate Dad's magic, touch with customers. But we weren't in immediate financial danger, especially if I continued working without taking a salary. "Money isn't everything," Mama said, but her voice lacked conviction. "No," I agreed, "but money is how we keep the lights on and pay for Dad's therapy and make sure Mateo has clothes that fit." Mateo, who was struggling with his own version of our family crisis. My little brother had become even more withdrawn. Since Dad's stroke, spending most of his time in his room or hanging out with friends whose names I didn't recognize. When he did work shifts at the bakery, he moved through his tasks with mechanical efficiency, polite to customers, but completely disconnected from the work itself. "This isn't what he wanted for you," Mama said softly. "Your father always said you were meant for bigger things than this bakery. Maybe bigger things come in different forms than we expected." I said, but I could hear the defensiveness in my own voice. The truth was, I was scared to think too hard about what I was giving up or what I was gaining. It was easier to focus on the daily tasks, the immediate problems that needed solving, the small satisfactions of a job done well. Whenever I tried to imagine myself in a lecture hall or dorm room, the image felt hazy and unreal, like trying to remember a dream from. Weeks ago, my friendship with Liam had become one of the few bright spots in this new reality. He'd started staying longer during his morning visits, and our conversations had evolved from polite customer chat to the kind of easy exchanges that made me remember what it felt like to be young and full of possibilities. "I brought you something," he said one Tuesday morning, pulling a small paper bag from his jacket pocket. "I finally figured out what makes your dad's croissants so special." Inside the bag was a single croissant, clearly homemade, with layers that looked almost identical to Dad's signature pastry. "You reverse-engineered our croissant?" I asked, impressed despite myself. "I tried," he said with a sheepish grin. "Spent 3 weeks experimenting with different butter-to-flour ratios and folding techniques. I think I got close, but taste it and tell me what I'm missing." I took a bite, and it was genuinely good, buttery, flaky, with the right balance of salt and sweetness. But it was missing something ineffable, some quality that came from years of practice and an intuitive understanding of how dough behaves. "It's really good," I said honestly, "but it needs more time." Time? Not just in the oven, but in your hands. Dad always says that pastry can tell if you're impatient with it. "This tastes like you were watching the clock." Liam laughed. "That's exactly what I was doing. I was so worried about overproofing that I kept checking every 5 minutes. Bread doesn't like to be watched," I said, repeating one of Dad's favorite sayings. "It needs trust more than attention." "Your dad sounds like a philosopher." "He is, in his way, or was before ... I trailed off, not sure how to finish that sentence. "Before his stroke?" Liam said gently. "But that doesn't mean he stopped being." Wise, right? Just that he has to share his wisdom differently now. This was exactly the kind of thing that made me appreciate Liam's company so much. He had a way of seeing around problems to their human centers, of finding hope without diminishing. "Difficulty. How is he doing?" Liam asked. "If you don't mind me asking." "Some days are better than others," I said, using the phrase that had become my standard response to that question. Yesterday, he told his physical therapist that her hair looked nice like sunshine, which was the longest coherent sentence he's managed in weeks. But this morning, he couldn't remember the word for coffee. "That must be frustrating for all of you." "It is," I admitted. "But it's also ... I don't know how to describe it. Like we're all learning a new language together, and sometimes we understand each other perfectly, even when the words aren't right." I hadn't articulated this feeling to anyone before, hadn't even fully realized I was feeling it until I said it out loud. But it was true, there was something about Dad's condition that had forced our whole family to communicate more intentionally, to pay attention to gestures and expressions and the spaces between words. "That sounds beautiful, actually," Liam sighed. "Difficult, but beautiful." "Yeah," I said, surprised by how much lighter I felt after sharing this observation with someone who seemed to understand it. "It is both those things." That afternoon, my friend Ava called while I was reorganizing the supply closet, a task that had become my go-to stress management technique. "Calla, oh my God, I feel like we haven't talked in forever," she said, her voice bright with a particular enthusiasm of someone whose biggest problem was choosing between 2 appealing weekend plans. "We talked last week," I said, cradling the phone against my shoulder while I counted napkin packages. "That was barely 5 minutes, and you sounded exhausted. How are you holding up?" "I'm fine," I said automatically, then caught myself. "Actually, I'm tired and overwhelmed, and sometimes I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm managing." "That's not the same as fine," Ava pointed out. "When was the last time you did something just for fun? Something that wasn't related to the bakery? Or your dad's recovery?" I tried to think of an answer and came up empty. "I don't really have time for fun right now." "Calla, that's not sustainable. You're 19, not 49. You need to have some kind of life outside of family obligations." "This is my life right now," I said, hearing the edge in my voice. "I can't just pause everything because I'm 19 and supposed to be having fun." "I'm not saying you should pause everything," Ava said, her tone careful. "I'm saying you should find ways to be 19 while also being responsible. They don't have to be mutually exclusive." After we hung up, I found myself thinking about her words while I finished counting inventory. Was I using responsibility as an excuse to avoid the messinesses of being young? Or was I genuinely growing up faster than my peers because circumstances demanded it? That evening, during Dad's speech therapy session, I watched him struggle to pronounce words that used to flow from his mouth like music. His frustration was evident in the way his right hand clenched and unclenched, in the tears that sometimes gathered in his eyes when a simple word refused to cooperate. "Good work today, Carlos," Jennifer said at the end of the session. "Your articulation is definitely improving. I can see the progress, even if it doesn't feel fast enough." After she left, Ad and I sat together in the quiet of his room. Outside, the sun was setting over Queens, casting long shadows across the parking lot. He was tired, I could tell, but he was also more alert than he'd been in weeks. "Proud," he said suddenly, the word clear and unmistakable. "What?" I asked. Double quotes, proud, of you, he managed, each word requiring visible effort but coming out recognizably. "Proud of my Calla." I felt tears spring to my eyes. "Papa, you don't have to be proud of me for this. I'm just doing what anyone would do." He shook his head firmly. "No," he said, and this word came easier. "Special. You special." As I drove home that night, I thought about the distance between the life I planned and the life I was living. 6 months ago, I would have measured success by acceptance letters and scholarship amounts and the prestige of the institutions that wanted me. Now I measured it by whether Dad could say 3 words in a row, whether we had enough sandwich rolls for the lunch rush, whether I could make it through a day without crying from exhaustion. But maybe Liam was right about time and trust. Maybe this new life needed both time to reveal its shape and trust that it was leading somewhere meaningful. Even if I couldn't see the destination yet, when I got home, Mateo was sitting at the kitchen table with his homework spread out around him, looking lost in a way that made my heart ache. "How was school?" I asked, settling down across from him. "Fine," he said without looking up, but I could see the tension in his shoulders. "Mateo," I said gently, "I know this has been hard on you too, with Dad in the hospital and everything changing so fast." He was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Do you think he's going to get better? Really better, not just different?" It was the first time he'd asked me directly about Dad's prognosis, and I realized he'd been carrying this question alone for months. "I think he's going to get as better as he can," I said carefully, which might not be exactly the same as he was before, but that doesn't mean he won't be okay. "And you?" Mateo asked, finally looking at me. "Are you going to be okay?" That evening, I called Ava and told her everything about the letter, about my parents' plans, about feeling like I'd been sacrificing for something that was already ending. "So, what are you going to do?" she asked after I'd finished explaining. "I don't know," I said honestly. Part of me feels like I've been naive and foolish, giving up college for something my parents were ready to abandon anyway. But another part of me thinks maybe this is an opportunity to figure out what I actually want, not just what I thought I was supposed to want. "What do you mean?" "I mean, when I thought about college 6 months ago, I was running towards something journalism, adventure, independence. But I was also running away from the bakery, from the neighborhood, from the smallness of our life here. Now that I've been living this life for real, I'm not sure it's as small as I thought it was." "You've changed," Ava observed. "When we talk now, you sound, I don't know, more grounded. More like you know who you are. Is that good or bad?" "I think it's good," she said. "But I also think you need to make sure you're not just settling for what feels safe instead of what feels right." After we hung up, I walked downstairs to the darkened bakery and stood among the tables and chairs where I'd spent so many hours. Over the past few months, in the streetlight coming through the windows, everything looked different, smaller, but also more precious. Like looking at childhood photos and being surprised by how much love can fit in ordinary spaces. Maybe Mama was right that the building was just bricks and ovens. But maybe it was also true that those bricks and ovens had shaped something meaningful, not just bread and pastries, but community and connection and the particular satisfaction that comes from feeding people well. The question wasn't whether the bakery was worth saving. The question was whether I was ready to decide what kind of life I wanted to build. And where I wanted to build it, the phone call came on a Wednesday evening in early December while I was upstairs trying to make sense of our quarterly tax forms. I'd been staring at the same page of receipts for 20 minutes, my mind wandering between depreciation schedules and the conversation I'd had with Dad about dreams versus buildings. When the bakery phone rang downstairs, normally I would have let it go to voicemail. We'd been closed for 3 hours, and anyone calling that late was probably looking for directions or hours of operation. But something made me hurry down the stairs and catch it on the fourth ring. Santiago Bakery, I said, slightly out of breath.
Is this Calla Santiago?
The voice was unfamiliar, crisp and professional. Yes, this is Calla. My name is Patricia Esperanza. I'm the attorney who sent your family the property assessment letter. I was hoping we could schedule a time to discuss your options in more detail. I felt my heart rate pick up. I'm not sure we're ready to discuss options yet. My father is still recovering from his stroke, and we haven't made any decisions about the future. I understand completely, Ms. Esperanza said, her tone gentle but persistent. But I wanted you to know that we've had some preliminary interest from developers who are actively looking in your neighborhood. The market is very strong right now, and properties like yours are increasingly rare. What kind of developers? A group that specializes in mixed-use buildings, commercial space. On the ground floor, luxury apartments above. They're particularly interested in corner properties with established businesses that provide neighborhood character. Neighborhood character. As if the 40 years my family had spent building relationships with customers was a selling point. For people who plan to tear it all down. Can I ask how you got our information? I said. We never contacted your office. There was a brief pause. Your mother reached out to us last spring, asking for a preliminary evaluation. We've been following up periodically, as requested. Last spring. Before the stroke, before I'd given up college, before everything changed. I tried to imagine my parents sitting around our kitchen table, calmly discussing the sale of the only home I'd ever known, and found I couldn't picture it. Had they been planning this while helping me load boxes for college, while celebrating my scholarship? I appreciate the call, I said finally, but we're not ready to move forward with anything right now. Of course.
But Calla, I call you.
Calla, I hope you'll consider that timing can be important with these opportunities. The neighborhood is in transition and values are likely at their peak. Waiting another year or two could mean significantly less money. After I hung up, I stood in the dark bakery, feeling like I was balanced on the edge of a cliff I couldn't see. On one side was the familiar weight of obligation and tradition, the life I'd been building one careful day at a time. On the other side was possibility, not just the money from selling, but the freedom to choose something entirely different. I was still standing there when I heard someone tapping on the front window. Through the glass, I could see Liam's familiar silhouette, his hands cupped around his eyes, as he peered into the darkened shop. I unlocked the door and let him in, grateful for the interruption to my spiraling thoughts. I saw the lights on upstairs and the downstairs light turn on, he said. Just wanted to make sure everything was okay.
Late night phone call, I said. Want some coffee? I was about to make it hot anyway.
While the coffee brewed, I found myself telling Liam about the attorney's call, about the developers and the market timing and the increasingly complex web of decisions that seemed to be closing in around me. It sounds like a lot of pressure, he said when I finished. It is, and the thing is, I'm not even sure what I want anymore. 3 months ago, I was clear about everything. I wanted to go to college. I wanted to leave the neighborhood. I wanted to be a journalist. Now, I can't imagine any of that clearly. Maybe that's not a bad thing, Liam said thoughtfully. Maybe it means you're figuring out who you actually are instead of who you thought you were supposed to be. What do you mean? I mean, when I was 18, I was convinced I wanted to be a chef at some fancy restaurant in Manhattan. That was my whole plan: culinary school, stages at high-end places, eventually my own fine dining establishment. Very serious, very prestigious, very far from the neighborhood where I grew up. What changed? I got a job at Russo's temporarily, just to save money for school. And I realized that what I actually loved wasn't the prestige or the complexity. It was the connection. The way regular customers would light up when I remembered their usual order. The way a perfectly cooked meal could make someone's bad day better. The fancy restaurants I dreamed about working in felt cold and competitive. This felt like home.
So, you gave up your original plan?
I changed my plan, he corrected. Instead of trying to escape my community, I decided to serve it better. Hence the food truck idea. I want to bring really good, affordable food to neighborhoods like this one. Places where people deserve excellent meals, but can't always access them. And you're happy with that choice?
Most days, he said honestly.
Some days I wonder if I'm settling, if I'm afraid to take bigger risks. But then I think about the difference between settling and choosing, and I remember that staying small can be brave too, if it's what feels right. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, drinking coffee and watching the occasional car pass by on Roosevelt Avenue. The street looked different, that this hour quieter, more intimate, like a neighborhood getting ready for sleep. Can I ask you something? Liam said eventually. Sure. If money wasn't a factor, if your family was completely financially secure, and your dad was fully recovered, what would you want to do with your life? I started to give him the automatic answer: college, journalism, the life I'd always planned, but something made me stop and really consider the question. I said slowly, I'd want to write. But maybe not the kind of writing I thought I wanted to do. Maybe I'd want to write about places like this, about people like our customers, about the kinds of stories that don't usually make it into newspapers, but matter just as much. That sounds like something you could do from anywhere, Liam observed. Including here. But what about college? What about getting out and seeing the world? Who says you can't do both? Who says college has to happen at 18, or that seeing the world requires leaving permanently? The next morning, I woke up with an idea that felt both terrifying and perfect. Instead of getting dressed and heading downstairs to start the morning baking, I sat at my desk and opened my laptop. For the first time in months, I began to write not the dutiful essays for my online courses, but the kind of writing that felt necessary and urgent. I wrote about Mrs. Chun, who came in every Tuesday for her guava pastry and always asked about my father's progress with the kind of genuine concern that made me remember why community mattered. I wrote about the construction workers who had adopted our lunch counter as their regular spot, teaching me Spanish curse words while I taught. Then the difference between a croissant and a crescent roll. I wrote about watching my father relearn language and how his struggles had taught me that communication was about much more than words. I wrote for 3 hours straight, until Mama's voice calling from downstairs reminded me that the bakery needed to open and the morning rush wouldn't wait for inspiration. Sorry, I said, hurrying into the kitchen. I lost track of time. Doing what? Mama asked, but not unkindly. Writing, I said, and the word felt different in my mouth than it had in months. Not like something I used to do, but something I was actively doing. That afternoon, I printed out what I'd written and brought it with me to Dad's speech therapy session. Jennifer was working with him on reading comprehension, having him identify objects and photographs and construct simple sentences about them. That's excellent, Carlos, she said as he successfully described a picture of a family eating dinner. Your vocabulary is really expanding. After therapy, Dad and I sat in his room while he rested. I've been planning to tell him about the attorney's call, about the pressure to make decisions, about the bakery's future. But instead, I found myself pulling out the pages I'd written. Papa, I said, I want to read you something I wrote. About us, about the bakery, about everything that's happened. He nodded, settling back in his chair with the patient attention he'd always given to my writing. Even back when I was 10 years old and writing stories about talking animals, I read slowly, watching his face as I described our customers. Our neighborhood, The way our small bakery served as a gathering place for people who might otherwise feel invisible in a city as large as New York. I read about his stroke, about the way our family had learned to communicate in new languages of patience and persistence. I read about my own confusion and growth, about discovering that some dreams are worth changing and others were worth holding on to. When I finished, Dad was quiet for a long moment. Then he smiled, the full, genuine smile I remembered from before. The stroke. Beautiful, he said clearly. You ... right ... truth. Do you think it's good enough? Good enough to maybe share with other people? Better than good, he said. Important. That evening, I called my former English teacher, Mrs. Albright, and asked if she had a few minutes to talk. She'd been the one who first encouraged my writing, who had helped me apply for scholarships, and believed I had something worth saying. Calla, she said, her voice warm with genuine pleasure. I've been wondering how you're doing. I heard about your father. I'm so sorry. Thank you, Mrs. Albright. I have a question for you. Do you remember that community writing workshop you mentioned when I was a senior? The one that meets at the library? Of course. Why? Is it still running? And would they be interested in? Someone who's not currently enrolled in college. They'd be very interested, she said immediately. Especially if that someone happens to be a talented writer with important stories to tell. Calla, are you thinking about getting back into writing? Seriously? I think I am, I said. But maybe not in the way I originally planned. Sometimes the best plans are the ones we never make, Mrs. Albright said. Sometimes life writes our stories for us, and we just have to be brave enough to read them. The community writing workshop met every Thursday evening in the basement of the Elmhurst Public Library in a room that smelled like old books and fresh coffee from the vending machine upstairs. When I walked in for the first time in January, I felt simultaneously nervous and hopeful, like someone returning to a language they'd once been fluent in but hadn't spoken for months. Mrs. Albright had prepared the group for my arrival, explaining about my father's stroke and my decision to defer college to help with the family business. But as I looked around the circle of faces ranging from teenagers to retirees, representing the beautiful diversity of Queen's Eye, realized that everyone here had their own story about choosing writing despite complicated circumstances. We're not here to become famous, said Elena, the workshop leader, a soft-spoken woman in her 50s who taught high school English by day and wrote poetry by night. We're here to bear witness to our own lives and our communities, to find the universal truths in our particular experiences. The group included Marcus, a subway conductor who wrote short stories during these breaks between shifts, Maria, a recent grandmother who was documenting her family's immigration story, David, a retired accountant exploring memoir, and several high school students who reminded me of myself just a year ago, passionate, determined, convinced that writing was their ticket to somewhere bigger and better. For our first exercise, Elena asked us to write about a moment when we realized something important about ourselves. I found myself writing about the morning. I'd woken up expecting to be in a college dorm, and instead found myself learning to calculate profit margins on pastry sales. I thought sacrifice meant giving up what you wanted for something less important, I wrote. I didn't realize it could mean discovering what you actually needed. When it came time to share, I was surprised by how clearly my voice carried in the small room, how the words felt both personal and somehow larger than just my own experience. That's beautiful, said Marcus after I finished reading. You write about family obligation like it's a choice instead of a burden. That's unusual. Maybe that's because I'm finally realizing it was a choice, I said, even when it didn't feel like one. Over the next several weeks, I began to develop a routine that felt sustainable for the first time since Dad's stroke. Mornings in the bakery, helping with the early rush and learning to perfect the recipes that Dad was slowly teaching me during his weekend visits home. Afternoons split between bookkeeping and visiting him at the rehab center, where his progress continued to be steady, if slow. Thursday evenings at the writing workshop, where I was rediscovering the joy of crafting sentences and sharing stories. The balance wasn't perfect, I was still tired most of the time. Still felt the weight of responsibilities that most 19-year-olds
Didn't carry.
But for the first time in months, I felt like I was building something instead of just maintaining it. My relationship with Liam was evolving too, moving from friendly customer conversations to something that felt like genuine courtship. Old-fashioned and careful in the best possible way. He'd started coming by after his shifts at Russo's, helping me close the bakery and walking me home even though I lived upstairs. You know, I don't actually need an escort. I teased him one evening as he insisted on carrying the day's cash receipts up to our apartment. I know, he said, smiling. But I like making sure you get home safely. And I like spending time with you. Even when I smell like bread and coffee and I'm covered in flour. Especially then, he said seriously. You look like someone who's been doing important work. One evening in late February, Liam arrived at the bakery with a large cardboard box and an expression of barely contained excitement. What's that? I asked, wiping down the espresso machine. A surprise, he said. Well, sort of.
It's actually a business proposal.
He opened the box to reveal an assortment of beautiful, clearly homemade food containers, glass jars filled with colorful sauces, vacuum-sealed packages of what looked like gourmet sandwiches, small containers of desserts that looked too elegant. For takeout, I've been experimenting, he said, with the food truck concept. But instead of starting with a truck, which requires permits and capital I don't have yet, I thought maybe I could start with a catering business. Small events, office lunches, maybe a weekly meal delivery service for busy families. This looks incredible, I said, examining a jar of what appeared to be homemade salsa verde. But why are you showing me? Because I was hoping we could partner, he said, and I could hear the nervousness in his voice. Your bakery has an established customer base, a commercial kitchen, a reputation in the neighborhood. My food could complement your pastries instead of competing with them. We could offer lunch catering, maybe weekend meal prep services. Liam, I said slowly, that's actually a brilliant idea. But I can't make decisions like that without talking to my family. This is still my parents' business, even if I'm running it day to day. Of course, he said quickly. I just wanted to see if you thought it had potential before I developed a formal proposal. That weekend, when Dad came home for his usual Saturday visit, I found myself presenting Liam's idea with more enthusiasm than I'd expected to feel. Dad listened carefully, asking questions about logistics and profit margins that reminded me how sharp his business instincts remained despite his communication challenges. Double quotes smart. Boy, he said when I finished explaining. Good. Cook. Heart, you think it could work? Could work? He agreed. But bigger question. You what? Partnership with him? The way he asked made me realize he wasn't just talking about business. I think so, I said honestly. I mean, I like him. I trust him. And I think we could build something good together. Then try, Dad said simply. Start small. See What happens? The conversation with Mama was more complicated. She supported the idea of expanding our revenue streams, especially if it meant we could afford to hire additional help. But she was worried about the implications of partnering with someone I was also dating. What happens if the personal relationship doesn't work out? She asked. What happens to the business partnership? What happens if it does work out? I countered. What if we build something really good together? You're 19, Mia. You don't know what you want yet. Maybe not, I said. But I know what feels right. And this feels right. We agreed to start with a trial period. Liam would provide lunch items 3 days a week, splitting the profits 50-50, with the option to expand or discontinue based on customer response. The first week was a revelation. Liam's Gourmet. Sandwiches and daily soups attracted new customers who had never thought of our bakery as a lunch destination. His quinoa salads and grain bowls appealed to the health-conscious professionals who worked in the area, while his comfort food specials, the kind of elevated mac and cheese and shepherd's pie he perfected at, We're so satisfied our existing. Customers who are looking for something hearty and familiar.
We're actually running out of food, I told him on Wednesday afternoon, watching the last container of his white bean and kale soup disappear.
That's never happened before with lunch.
Items. Good problem to have, he said, grinning as he wiped down the counter we designated as his prep space. I can increase the quantities next week.
Liam, I said, suddenly feeling shy, this is really working.
Yeah, he said, moving closer to me. It really is.
When he kissed me, standing in the empty bakery with the late afternoon sun streaming, through the windows, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. Like we'd been building toward this moment for months, one conversation and one shared meal at a time. That night, at the writing workshop, I found myself writing about the difference between the future you plan and the future you build. I used, to think that dreams were destinations, I wrote. Places you had to travel to in order to become the person you were supposed to be. Now I think dreams might be more like ingredients, things you combine with what you already have to create something entirely new. Elena smiled when I finished reading. That sounds like someone who's figured out the difference between escaping and growing. After the workshop, I walked home through the familiar streets of my neighborhood, noticing things I'd never paid attention to before. The way the light from apartment windows created patterns on the sidewalk. The sounds of different languages, mixing together on the evening air. The smell of dinner cooking in a dozen different kitchens, each family creating their own version of home. This was the neighborhood I'd once been desperate to leave. The place that had felt too small for my ambitions. But maybe the problem hadn't been the place itself. Maybe it had been my understanding of what it meant to build a meaningful life. When I got upstairs, Mama was reading in the living room and Mateo was doing homework at the kitchen table. The scene was so ordinary, so comfortable, that I felt a wave of gratitude for the strange journey that had brought me back to this moment. "How was writing group?" Mama asked, looking up from her book. "Good," I said. "Really good. I'm starting to feel like myself again." "What do you mean?" I'm starting to understand who that self actually is," I said. "And I like her more than I expected to." 6 months later, I stood in our rebuilt kitchen at 5 a.m, watching the sunrise paint the windows gold while the first batch of Liam's signature cinnamon rolls rose in the proof box. We'd installed next to Dad's. Traditional bread ovens. The bakery had transformed gradually over the spring and summer, adding lunch service and weekend catering while maintaining the warm neighborhood feel that had always defined Santiago's. Dad was back to working 3 mornings a week, moving. More slowly than before, but with the same careful attention to detail that had made our bread legendary in the neighborhood. His speech was clearer now, though he still chose his words carefully, and his left hand had regained enough function to help with simple tasks. Watching him teach Liam the secrets of proper dough consistency felt like witnessing a master craftsman passing on sacred knowledge. "Patience," Dad said, his voice clearer now after months of speech therapy. "Bread ... knows ... when you rush." Liam nodded seriously, his hands gentle as he worked the dough. Over the past 6 months, he'd become not just my business partner, but an unofficial member of our family, joining us for Sunday dinners and helping with Dad's physical therapy exercises. The easy way he'd integrated into our lives felt natural and right, like he'd always been meant to be here. "I think it's ready," Liam said, showing Dad the smooth, elastic dough that would become our Monday morning bread special. "Perfect," Dad said, and the word came out clearly, with the satisfaction of someone who still found joy in small victories. Mama came downstairs just as I was setting up the register for the day, her hair already neatly pinned and her apron tied. With the efficiency of someone who'd been doing this routine for 30 years. "Busy day today," she said, reviewing the catering orders that had become a significant part of our revenue. The Peterson wedding cake pickup, the law office lunch, delivery, and Mrs. Chun's birthday party platter. "I'll handle the deliveries," I said. "Liam's doing the Peterson cake decoration this afternoon. And you have your interview at 3? Mama reminded me. The interview. After 8 months of writing workshop and several published pieces in the local community paper, I'd been offered a freelance position covering neighborhood news for a Queens-based magazine. It was part-time, flexible enough to work around the bakery schedule, and focused exactly on the kind of stories I discovered I wanted to tell: profiles of local business owners, coverage of community events, features about the immigrants, and families who made our neighborhood the vibrant place it was. "Are you nervous?" Mama asked. "A little," I admitted, but excited mostly. It feels like everything is finally coming together. The morning rush was busier than usual, with several new customers drawn in by the magazine review that I'd called. "You was Queen's best-kept secret for artisanal bread and innovative lunch fare." I loved watching people try Liam's food for the first time, the way their faces would light up when they tasted his Korean-Mexican fusion tacos or his grandmother's Pozo recipe adapted for busy weekday lunches. "Excuse me," said a woman I didn't recognize, approaching the counter with a manila folder in her hands. "Are you Calla Santiago?" "Yes," I said, immediately wary. Over the past few months, we'd had several developers and real estate agents approach. Use about selling the building, all of them polite but persistent in a way that made me uncomfortable. "My name is Janet Morrison," she said. "I'm a food writer for New York Magazine, and I'm working on a piece about family businesses that have successfully adapted to changing neighborhoods. I was hoping I could interview you about your story." New York Magazine. The kind of publication I'd once dreamed of writing for, now wanting to write about me. "What exactly is the story?" I asked carefully. "Honestly, it's about young people who are choosing to stay in their communities instead of leaving for college or other opportunities. About how that choice is changing both the individuals and the neighborhoods they're serving." "And you think that's what I'm doing? Aren't you?" she asked with a smile. "From what I've heard, you gave up a full scholarship to NYU to help save your family's bakery. And now you're building something entirely new while honoring what came before." I looked around the bakery at Dad teaching Liam about proper oven temperature, at Mama chatting with Mrs. Rodriguez about her grandson's upcoming baptism, at Mateo working the register with the kind of competence that suggested he might actually be interested in learning the family business. "I guess that is what I'm doing," I said, "though it doesn't feel as dramatic as you make it sound." "The best stories rarely do," Janet said. "Could we schedule a time to talk more formally? I'd love to hear about your writing as well as the bakery. I understand you're documenting your community." After she left, I found myself thinking about the distance between the life I planned and the life I was living. A year ago, I would have seen that distance as failure, as evidence that I'd somehow gotten off track. Now it felt more like the difference between a rough draft and a final version, not worse. Just more refined, more true to what I actually wanted to say. The interview that afternoon went better than I'd expected. The magazine editor, a sharp woman in her 40s who'd grown up in Astoria, understood exactly the kind of stories I wanted to tell. "Community journalism is having a renaissance," she explained. "People are hungry for stories about real places and real people, especially in a city where gentrification is changing neighborhoods so rapidly. We need writers who understand their communities from the inside." "That's exactly what I want to do," I said. "Tell stories about the people who make neighborhoods work, who create the connections that turn collections of buildings into actual communities." "Perfect," she said. "Can you start with a piece about your own neighborhood? Something about how local businesses are adapting to serve changing demographics while maintaining their cultural identity." I could start with my own story, I realized. The bakery that had learned to serve Korean-Mexican fusion alongside traditional Colombian pastries. The family that had discovered new dreams while holding on to old values. The young woman who had found her voice by choosing to stay instead of leaving. That evening, Liam and I walked to the overlook by the Queens Boulevard Bridge, where you could see Manhattan's skyline glittering in the distance. It was the same view I'd stared at countless times as a teenager, dreaming about the life I'd build once I escaped to the city. Now I looked at it with different eyes, not as a destination I'd failed to reach, but as one option among many beautiful, but not necessarily better than what I was building here. Do you ever regret it? Liam asked, following my gaze toward the Midtown Towers. Giving up Columbia? The journalism program you had planned? I didn't give up journalism, I said. I just found a different way to practice it. And I didn't give. At Columbia Forever, I deferred, not canceled. I can still apply for next year or the year after, or whenever it feels right. But do you want to? I considered this seriously. Columbia still represented something appealing: prestige, challenge, the validation of being accepted into an elite institution. But it also represented a version of myself that I was no longer sure I wanted to become. I think I want to keep building what we've started, I said. Here, with you, with my family. Maybe I'll take some classes part-time eventually, but I don't want to leave just to prove I can succeed somewhere else. Even if it means staying in the neighborhood where you grew up, even if people think you're settling. Especially then, I said. I think there's something radical about choosing to bloom where you're planted, about deciding that your community is worth investing in instead of escaping from. Liam reached for my hand, interlacing our fingers with the easy intimacy that had developed over months of working side by side. I love that about you, he said. The way you see potential instead of limitations. I love that you see it too, I said. That you want to build something meaningful instead of just successful. We stood there in comfortable silence, watching the city lights reflect on the East River. In the distance, I could see the Queens neighborhoods spreading out around us, blocks of family homes and small businesses, communities where people spoke dozens of languages and cooked foods from every corner of the world. Places where children grew up bilingual and elderly grandparents shared benches in small parks. This was the world I'd once been desperate to leave. Now it felt like the perfect place to build a life. 6 months later, when the New York Magazine article was published with the headline, "The New American Dream, Staying Home to Build Community," I read it with the same mixture of pride and embarrassment I felt when teachers used to share my high school essays as examples for other students, but the article had an impact I hadn't expected. I began getting emails from other young people who were struggling with similar choices. Recent graduates wondering if they should move back home to help with family businesses, college students questioning whether their expensive degrees were leading them toward lives they actually wanted, immigrants' children trying to balance their parents with their own dreams of mobility. I thought success meant leaving my neighborhood behind, wrote one woman from Boston. But your story made me realize that maybe success means making my neighborhood better. I started a blog to respond to these messages, writing about the daily realities of choosing family over individual ambition, about the challenges and rewards of building something meaningful in the place where you grew up. The blog led to speaking invitations, community college career workshops, immigrant family organizations, young professional groups trying to figure out how to have both career success and strong roots. The question isn't whether you should stay or go. I would tell these groups. The question is whether you're making choices based on fear or based on love. Fear of being trapped, fear of disappointing people, fear of not living up to some imaginary standard of success, or love of community, love of family, love of the particular work that calls to you. On a warm Tuesday morning in September, almost exactly 2 years after I was supposed to have started college, I stood in our kitchen making Dad's tres leches cake for a regular customer's birthday while Liam prepped his weekly special Korean style short-rib tacos that had become so popular we couldn't keep up with demand. Dad was working the front counter, his speech now clear enough that customers often forgot he'd ever had a stroke. Mama was reviewing catering contracts, and Mateo was learning to operate the new espresso machine we'd installed to handle our growing morning coffee business. "We're thinking about opening on Sundays," Mama said, looking up from our paperwork. "Not full service, maybe just coffee and pastries." "What do you think?" "I think we should ask Dad," I said. "This is still his bakery, our bakery," Dad corrected gently. "Family ... business, family ... decisions." That afternoon, I had a Skype interview with a documentary filmmaker who wanted to include our story in a film about changing definitions of success in America. After that, I needed to finish my article about the new community garden that had been built on a formerly vacant lot 3 blocks away. Another story about people choosing to invest in their neighborhood instead of abandoning it. These were not the kinds of professional achievements I dreamed about as a high school senior. I wasn't working for the New York Times or traveling the world as a foreign correspondent, but my work felt important in a way that those distant dreams never had. I was documenting my community, amplifying voices that might otherwise go unheard, helping people see the beauty and complexity in places they might otherwise overlook. Evening, as Liam and I closed the bakery together, a routine that had become as natural as breathing, I found myself thinking about the different ways a life could be successful. Do you think we're doing enough? I asked him as we wiped down. The last table. Building enough. Reaching enough people. I think we're doing what we can with what we have, he said. And I think that's enough for now. But what about bigger impact? What about changing the world? Liam smiled, the same slow smile that had first caught my attention almost 2 years ago. Maybe changing the world starts with changing a neighborhood? Maybe it starts with making really good food for people who work hard and deserve to eat well. Maybe it starts with telling stories about people whose stories don't usually get told. Maybe, I said, though part of me still wondered about the roads not taken, the versions of myself I'd never get to become. Calla, Liam said gently, you gave up college to save your family's business. Instead of just saving it, you transformed it. You gave up your original dream of being a journalist, and instead you became a writer whose work actually matters to people. You thought you were settling for a smaller life, but you built a bigger one than you ever imagined. When you put it like that, I said, it sounds like I knew what I was doing all along. Maybe you did. Or maybe you just trusted yourself enough to figure it out as you went. That night, I sat at my desk and began writing the essay that would eventually become my first book, a collection of stories about young people who had chosen community over career advancement, family over individual success, roots over mobility. The book that would lead to a small press contract, to speaking engagements at universities where students were questioning the traditional pathways to success. But that night, I was just writing about what I knew, the smell of bread rising at dawn, the satisfaction of feeding your neighbors well, the particular joy that comes from building something meaningful with the people you love, in the place where you belong. I was writing about the discovery that sometimes the life you don't plan turns out to be exactly the life you need. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.